This happened sometime a couple years ago, and this happened to one of my friends who was living in Nevada at the time in a pretty decent farmhouse. We'll call him by the name Ivan. Ivan was living at that farmhouse with his girlfriend, and they had been there for about at least 4 years. It used to belong to Ivan's parents, but however, though, to make a long story short, Ivan's parents couldn't really afford the place and they decided to sell it. They decided to sell the place, and of course, Ivan bought it because he was working at a pretty damn awesome job and that paid a lot. His girlfriend worked it pretty much a little bit too, just enough to provide them with some extra income. However, one of the times that they were at the farmhouse, something really weird happened. They owned a little barn and they did have a few horses and some other livestock animals, and they seemed to be doing pretty well. The first day, the chickens were doing their own thing, so they ended up getting a couple chickens to lay eggs. As they were getting the eggs, it all seemed normal. However, Ivan noticed that one of his chickens were missing. He couldn't seem to find anything, and he thought that maybe the chicken might have eaten by a coyote or a fox, maybe a wolf, as those critters do tend to be out during this time of night. However, this is when something odd really happened. It was in the middle of the night, and Ivan was reading a book when his girlfriend said that she saw something out in the field. He honestly thought that maybe she was just imagining things and thinking maybe it was her mind playing tricks since it was nighttime. However, Ivan's sister called and said that he did see something at the field while she was driving to the city from seeing her friends who lived up in the farm. But of course, Ivan thought that maybe his sister was joking, but his sister was not, and said that there was some sort of weird creature, and they happened to see it outside of their yard. That's when Ivan got out his hunting rifle and walked outside. And of course, when he got out to the field, he couldn't really see anybody out there, and it seemed just odd. Why was no one out there? That was literally the question that Ivan had when he walked out, but he couldn't really see anybody, and he didn't even know if anyone was out there or not. This honestly really surprised Ivan, since he never really enjoyed the idea, but of course, he didn't really like the idea of going out in the field at night, but when he did, he saw what seemed to be a tall figure. It stood about maybe a couple feet tall, maybe 6 or 7 feet. It looked like it had long skin and bone, and it looked very skinny. It didn't look like a bear or any sort of animal, but it looked like it could have been a person. Ivan shined his flashlight, but he couldn't really see the features on the figure since it was pretty tall, but of course it was all black, so at first he thought that maybe it could have been a person wandering around the property, as they had that happening a few times. But whatever it was looked at Ivan, and it let out a loud screech before taking off faster into the field and out of sight. At this point, Ivan was nearly shitting himself when his girlfriend came out and asked him if he was okay. Ivan eventually said that there was some creature or something out there that roared, and of course they went back inside. They never went outside for the night, but of course they ended up contacting the local sheriff about it, and the sheriff did a patrol of the area the next day, but didn't find anything. This comes to show you that at night in the countryside can be dangerous, although anywhere can be dangerous, especially at night. Nothing like this has happened since, and Ivan's just glad that whatever it was never came back, and he just hoped that creature never came back, and it never did. He and his girlfriend, who is now his wife, still live in that farmhouse today, but never had an experience like that again. And whatever this creature wanted, it probably had some not great intentions. Now, this was around the time when there was a bit of a drought in the area. But of course, that was back in 2018. This actually happened to a close friend of mine who owned her own farm named Siobhan. Siobhan was at a decent farm, and she did have at least a few horses and had some farm animals, and meanwhile her family did what they could to provide for the farm. It was one night that they ended up discovering something that was really messed up. Now, at the time of this story, Siobhan was about maybe 20 years old, and she was happening to be putting the animals into the barn for the night. As she was doing that, however, it was somewhere around 8 p.m. when the sun started going down. As soon as all the animals were in, Siobhan heads back to her place to get ready for bed. However, later on though, like a few hours later, Siobhan woke up to hearing what seemed to be like twigs and branches snapping outside. She thought that it could have been maybe a coyote, a wolf, or possibly some other creature wandering around. And of course, there wasn't really anybody out there since it was pitch black. But that's when Siobhan decided to take a step outside to make sure that whatever was making it wasn't going towards the barn. When she got to the barn, she didn't see any footprints or any sign of break-in from any creature trying to get into the livestock or the horses. As Siobhan ended up looking around, she turned around to see that there was some sort of creature hunched over on its back, and it looked like it was about 4 feet tall. She, of course, didn't get a chance to get a good look at it since it took off running before she even got a good glimpse of it. She then headed back to the house and locked the door, but then she realized that the horses might still be in there, and she didn't check on them. So she went back outside quickly, but the horses seemed to be fine. The animals were fine too, although they were a little startled when Siobhan opened up the barn door to check on them. When Siobhan went back outside, she looked around to see if she could see that creature again, or whatever it was that she saw, but she didn't see anything. This was kind of odd, as strange things like this don't usually happen. That was when she ended up walking back the way she came, and she never had an experience like that in her whole life. When she got back, though, she ended up going back into the house and locking herself at night. She thought that whatever that creature was, it could have been a coyote or something, but it didn't look like a dog. It more looked like human. She ended up bringing this up to her parents the next day when she woke up and they were having breakfast, and her dad said something that she'll never forget. He said that whatever that creature was happened to be these stories about the Dover demon or the rake sightings. Of course, Siobhan thought that maybe they were only found in the US, but apparently they could be found anywhere. If Siobhan had a camera out or something, she would have taken a photo to show evidence of it, but whatever it was, there was no one there, and nothing like that has ever happened. But she always wondered, what was that creature even doing around her property, and what was its intentions were. That's something that really scares her to this day, and it still has her on her toes just thinking about it. One of the teachers used to have a farm, and her name was Samantha. Now, her last name, I'm not going to be saying her last name for privacy reasons, but her name was Samantha. Samantha worked at a farm, and she was pretty good with farming. Her husband did most of the work, but on days when she didn't have to go to the high school to do classes, etc., she'd always do the help out along the farm, doing barn chores, etc. However, one of the nights that she was about to get ready for bed, she all of a sudden heard a tractor going. Most of the tractors that she and her husband had were already in the shed, and they were already in bed. But of course they should have been, because all the tractors were not being used. She ended up going outside to see there was someone driving the tractor in the middle of the field. It wasn't her field, but it was the next door neighbor's field, which of course their neighbors were many ways away. Whoever this person was, Samantha didn't know who he was, so the tractor kept moving, and that's when she dialed the police. It was way past curfew, and nobody should be on their tractor at this time. By the time she called the police and they arrived, they looked at that field but found no one in the tractor. The tractor was no longer in the field anymore. It was gone. And that house or farm next door was vacant, and nobody was supposed to be living there. Still to this day though, was Samantha ever wondered who was that man, or whoever it was in the tractor? Why was he out there? He didn't even had any knowledge of that Samantha did call, but I guess he must have ran away or something. Nothing like this has ever happened since, but of course, this is not really the type of story to make you jump out of your pants, but this was one strange night that Samantha had that honestly makes her wonder about who was out there. It still makes her wonder about who this person was or why they were having their tractor up so loud. But whatever it was, she probably doesn't want to know, and she clearly does not is not sure who it was. That still makes her wonder to this day. But of course, with that being said, she can't really honestly remember much about it, but this was definitely one of the nights that made her confused. So this happened to a teacher when she was living in Nebraska at a farm area at the time of the story. Now, one of the teachers that were in my high school was a drama teacher named Philip. Now, I'm not going to disclose his last name for privacy reasons, so his name was Philip. Philip was living with his wife, and they had 2 children, and they were living in Nebraska. Keep in mind that this was around 2015, so it was a year before he moved to Canada. Philip with his children were all asleep, and same with his wife, when all of a sudden Philip wakes up hours later, smelling what seemed to be smoke. This was honestly a sign that there could have been a fire somewhere, and Philip decided to see if anything had been turned on. Nothing in the house was turned on that would cause smoke like that, and he realized that it came from the neighbor's fire as he saw the smoke and a bit of flames being ignited in the distance. It seemed to be that someone or something had caused a fire near the next door neighbor houses, but of course it was right near their farm. This is when Philip ends up getting in his car, and he ends up driving over to the farmhouse. Of course, it wasn't near where the flames were, but he ended up running up and banging on their door. He banged on the door as well as banged on the windows too to try to see if anybody was awake. A man in his late 40s opened up the door and said, "Yeah?" He sounded really gruff, and he sounded like he was trying to sleep. Of course, this is when Philip yells in a panic, saying that the farm field where they are is on fire, and that their barn is close to being engulfed in the flames. "Okay, thank you," the neighbor said. He ended up waking up his kids, and apparently his wife and his parents, and they ended up calling 911. While Philip, and of course the guy, as well as his grandpa, tried to put out the flames by using what they could as water, they held off until the firefighters came and they put out the rest of the fire. The firefighters have no idea what caused the field by the barn they were at to be set on fire, and they searched the whole field after everything had cooled down the next day. They didn't see anybody, and they ever wondered who could have been responsible or what could have been responsible for the flames. Philip had a feeling that maybe it could have been because of dry grass, and if it was the case, lightning could have maybe possibly caused it to shock down and start the fire. But that was a little far-fetched since they had gotten rain most of the season, with the exception of some days that they would have it to be dry, but that wouldn't be surprising. And if Philip had not gone over next door and wake up the people that were sleeping, then the fire could have engulfed the whole farm of that neighbor, and God only knows what else damage it could have done. Philip is just glad he was able to wake up the neighbors and alert them about it. It just made him feel proud, and he's still going to remember this for a very, very long time.